Two. All right, everyone's awake. Well, you're here. We'll go for that. We'll settle for that. But yeah, thank you for coming to Legacy Expo and supporting us. And I hope you guys are having a really good time and getting to see a lot of really cool things and hear from a lot of really special people. So we are here now for the legend of Brian Daley, and he is a legendary person, I think.
He is definitely legendary. In and out of Star Wars.
Yeah. So, but we'll dive more into that. But first, we're going to introduce ourselves. My name is James Floyd. I am a writer for StarWars.com, Star Wars Insider Magazine, and author of Star Wars Crossword Puzzles and Other Word Games from a Galaxy Far, Far Away. There's a couple signed copies at the Space Galaxy booth. And I get to be here with these legends of themselves. You want to go down the line, Jim? You want to start?
James Luceno, contributor.
I'm Michael Kogi. I've written a lot of Star Wars. One of the pieces that I got to write was kind of a making of the Star Wars radio plays back in, I think in 2010 for Star Wars Insider. And I also did a biography of Brian, so that was a lot of fun to do.
Morning, everybody. My name is Enrique Guerrero. I'm a former freelance journalist for Luceno. I worked for Luceno back, started right around 1999. It was about a 8-year relationship that I did there, working on stuff for them. I was assigned to the New Jedi Order, which isn't what we're here to talk about today. But just for the work that I did for them, you have to have familiarity with them, Star Wars literature across the board, through all their licenses. And it was not only from my childhood reading Brian Daley's work, but just through my work for Luceno. I kind of got to return to Brian Daley's work and everything that he contributed, because it was really something special if you either read it or listened to it, experienced it anyway. It's phenomenal stuff, and it's always great to revisit.
Yeah. What were your guys' introductions to Brian Daley?
Brian was a very close friend of mine. We met when we were both working on our first novels in like 1974 in New Jersey through our girlfriends at the time, who were both waitresses in some dive bar in Jersey. We had a friendship all the way through to his untimely death in '96, and we were not only good friends, but we were traveling mates in different parts of the world, and collaborators on an anime series called Robotech, and then a series called Black Hole Travel Agency, which we wrote together. He was my closest buddy, so I knew him really well. We can talk about that.
Yeah, my first exposure to Brian Daley was likely the Star Wars radio plays when I was a kid. My uncle had taped the Empire Strikes Back off of NPR, Washington, D.C., and I still have those tapes. I used to listen to those on long car rides, and later I was able to listen to the original Star Wars radio play, but those radio plays made such a difference in my life in terms of what you could do with just audio, and they are, in some ways, the best versions of this story, I think. And it led me to, be the writer who I am today. And one of my passion projects right now, I'm writing and directing the John Carter Mars the Audio series, which is kind of I would say inspired by Star Wars. And we have actors like Sean Patrick Flannery, John Carter, Tim Russ from Star Trek Voyager as Tars Tarkas, and Ian McDermott, the Emperor as the Strange Man of the Tower. So it's been a real pleasure to see feel my own development from those moments when I was listening to Brian's work in the radio plays.
I saw the first Star Wars movie when I was about 7 years old. But when I was about 8 or 9, I think it was 9, my oldest brother handed me a copy of Han Solo at Star's End. And back then, there was no videotapes, there was no streaming, there was no cable. You didn't go to a rental store and rent the movie. What you saw on the screen, that's what stuck in your head. If you wanted more Star Wars, you needed to find another way to get those stories. In that moment, being just hooked on Star Wars even at 9 years old, Brian Daley delivered. So if you wanted more adventure within that galaxy far, far away. Brian Daley was a sorcerer, he loved that kind of story. So as a kid, it was incredible because you always had, for me, I had an appetite for more storytelling set in that universe. Little did I know that, 20 plus years later, I get to work for Lucasfilm, and I get to meet Mr. Cody right next to me, and we got to work together quite often. And he was constantly bringing Brian Daley back into the mix in terms of, listen to this, isn't this great? Just really championing the work that Brian did on the radio dramas, but it didn't stop there. He also had a real passion for what Brian Daley did with those 3 books in 79 and 80, what he did with radio dramas, what he did with Rebel Mission or Intel, and just it's one of those things where if you get to work with Michael, he really highlights those things that you need to pay attention to, and Brian Daley was always one of those constants, and so it was one of those things that I really appreciate. Thank you, Michael. It really illuminated just how special Brian was.
Yeah, my first exposure to Brian Daley was also on Solo Stars End. It was available at my library, and I got it, and I read it, and I read it, and then I had to give it back to the library. And then there was nothing else Star Wars to read, and like it took me years before I realized, oh, there's 2 other books by him that I think I managed to find, like one of the Lando Calrissian books, and enjoyed that. But then it's like, oh wow, there's Han Solo's Revenge, there's Han Solo The Lost Legacy, and it just opened up bigger worlds. And yeah, that Han Solo and Star Wars just still sticks with me. Like the storyline, I still remember it, and vividly, and just especially that ending with the whole thing. I'm a spoiler alert. Star's End is a prison, and in order to escape, they actually launch it.
It is such a great story. Brian, those books have none of the what I call the trademark symbols of Star Wars. There's just one mention of the Empire, but the rest are in this corporate sector kind of area. But they capture the spirit of Star Wars like few other books do. He really, if there was somebody to write Star Wars, this was the guy to do it. He just knew, it was in his bones, I think.
Yeah, it was. I think being close to the source, getting to write those books right on the heels of the first film, and Brian, Brian and I went to see the premiere of Star Wars together. I just turned 30, just give him some perspective. But he came out of that film just wide-eyed, and in personality, he was kind of like Han Solo. He was very roguish and cynical, but I think in the film, the character that he related to was Luke, because he'd spent his life just sort of stargazing. He just used to, he and his family would sit outside their home in New Jersey and gaze at the stars and wait for meteor showers and things like that. And I think the notion of Luke on Tatooine just looking up and knowing that there was something more out there, that's what sort of really drew Brian into the franchise, and he was just a natural, as Michael said.
There was something Michael said that I wanted to comment on. I wish I could pull you on to these conversations that we had way back in the day. Working for Lucasfilm, we often would have conversations just about what stories are Star Wars. What is it about this part? What elements need to be in play for this to be a Star Wars story? And there's a lot of things that are taken into consideration. But if you take that into account, you look at how the fandom likes Star Wars stories, and you see people kind of arguing or debating whether it's space opera or space fantasy or all these different subgenres of what makes a story a Star Wars story. Michael and I used to have a lot of conversations about that. And at some point, and this was after our last conversation, because some conversations don't go away, they keep playing in my head, but I just came to the conclusion, or at least the theory, that I don't really think there's any subgenre that really defines Star Wars. I kind of adopted, I think it's more of an aesthetic. You could be any kind of story, but if you've got stormtroopers, blasters, lightsabers, Jedi, the Force, all these little elements help make a story a Star Wars story. The problem with that theory is Brian Daley, because if you look at his books, especially those 3 books, there's no Empire, there's no Jedi, there's no Force. But there's no way you can read those stories without unquestionably saying this is Star Wars. That adventure, the swashbuckling feel about it, the corporate authority that kind of stands in for the Empire, the Western feel of everything, gunslingers, flying at the seat of your pants, just adventure after adventure after adventure with the character that, don't ever tell me the odds, going straight into that next crisis. It's Star Wars. And it's one of those things that when Michael would keep telling me, this is what we need, I get it. It doesn't fit within my theory, but it's unquestionably, this is a Star Wars story. And it's incredible. It's just incredible he was able to do that on the front end of what became the EU.
One of the things you said yesterday to me is that he had no videotapes to reference. But he got those voices down like no one else. He knew Han Solo's voice in Star Wars End. That guy had so many great lines in those books. And it's a Humphrey Bogart type of character too, right? So it's a classic trope.
Yes. And Brian spoke like that, actually. He really had that edge to him. I remember when he got the commission to write the first book, and he was just gung-ho and writing all about, stormtroopers and this, that, and the other thing, and then he got a note from Lucasfilm saying, no, you can't use any of that. That's all off limits to you. You can write about Han and Chewie, but don't go anywhere else. So Brian had to tear up, dozens of pages that he'd already written and start from scratch. But he just, he grew up on Marvel Comics, on Flash Gordon. He was just a natural fit. I think he had a lot of the same early influences that maybe George had. And so it just wouldn't work out for him.
Do you know a little more about the process of how he got to write the Han Solo books?
He was one of the first authors to be published under the Daley imprint. It was a spin-off from Valentine Books. He and Terry Brooks were two of the first authors. And when Daley got the license to do Star Wars, they just thought that Brian would be a good fit. He had published his first novel called Doomfarers of Coromon, which I really recommend. It's an excellent fantasy novel. And they thought he'd be a great fit for Star Wars. And he had a list of characters that he could choose from. He could write about Han, or he could write about Leia, but he was attracted to Han immediately.
So one of the things when I did the biography of Brian that I found out, we interviewed his old editor, Owen Locke.
Yeah.
And Brian wasn't the first person on the list. They had two other authors and they couldn't make the deadlines. These books, they were written in like 30 days, right? Yeah, when you write for work for hires like this, sometimes you had, when I was writing The Force Awakens junior novel, I had 2.5 weeks, It's like so intense.
Right.
So I can see Brian just, you're writing your first draft, that's what you have to do. You don't have a lot of time to polish. But he was able to do that, and he did it so well that when the radio play, the original writer of the radio play didn't work out, they went to Brian.
He was, he wrote on a Royal typewriter, just picking like this. And I would watch him sometimes. I don't know how many of you have ever seen Eddie Helen, play guitar, but when you feel like somebody is really just wedded to an instrument or a piece of technology, that was Brian, and it was coming right from his brain right out onto the paper. So the fact that he could do that in 30 days just didn't surprise me.
Yeah, and I remember Owen Locke, his editor, telling me, Brian, he could have done so much more. And I was like, oh my gosh, these editors think we just pump out these books. And he pumped out all of Robotech, the Coromon books, Tapestry of Magic, Tron. He had a book every year. It was amazing. And finally Gamma, which Jim finished. So
yeah. He just he was a natural writer. And he enjoyed writing more than anything. I would drag him on these trips to different places, but he was much more at home behind that Royal typewriter, just using his imagination. You know, whenever we go anywhere, I would always think, like, this is exotic, but it's probably not as exotic as what he's thinking in his head. So,
I know when you think about how the picture they painted in terms of how quickly he could write on the typewriter. On top of that, read his writing, and because the word count that he uses to put you in a character's head, to put you in a setting, to have you plugged into what he is setting up, it's truly amazing. The vocabulary there is absolutely delicious, and you know the character right off the bat. You know exactly whether it's a loan shark or a gunslinger or Han Solo or someone else. You're in that character's head immediately, and you know what's in front of them. You know what they're walking into or about to confront or what the situation is. And just his ability to do that in the word count that he did, with the word choice that he did, with the flow of the sentences that he has, that by itself is amazing when you think about how quickly he's doing this and the way he's doing this. It's brilliant. So, you know, it's really a treasure. If you get a chance to go back and review his books or his radio dramas, it's incredible stuff.
I was privileged to be in some of the recording sessions of the radio dramas, which Brian scripted, and in the recording sessions, sometimes lines of dialogue didn't work, so he'd be off in the corner writing what were considered wild lines. He would just constantly be able to come up with alternatives for dialogue. I mean, faster than anybody I'd ever seen. And I just want to hold this book up. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. It's the Star Wars radio dramas, and it's as much about Brian as it is about the making of the dramas, and it's a terrific read. It'll be up here if any of you want to take a look at it or take a photo of it.
Yeah, I'm talking about his writing. Look at Doomfairs. I always said Coromundé, but Coromund, is that how you pronounce it? Coromund, okay. That's his first novel, and you know he fought in Vietnam. So he came back from Vietnam. He was an older student when he went to college, finished up college, and you read his first novel, and it's like an English major meets a Vietnam vet meets somebody who wants to write fantasy. It's just a weird blend. It's a wonderful blend of that. And every chapter he has a little epigraph of a quote from a poem, like Spencer, Fairy Queen, all that stuff. He was a very, very literate writer. And I remember a scene in the book. I brought the book with me actually. I forgot to bring it on this panel, but there's this great scene where the Vietnam vet, the Vietnam soldier, he goes to a fantasy land and he wants to go back home. He finally gets back home to, I think it's New Jersey in the book, right? And then the best part of the book is in the middle, and he's in New Jersey trying to deal with his life, and he can't deal with it, and he wants to go back to this other world where he's been.
That's
right. Yeah, and so there's a great line where he knocks his Ford, I think he had a Ford pickup, knocks it on the side and wishes it good well, and he knows he's going to go back to this fantasy world. And it's just a great book.
Yeah, going back to the Han Solo books, do you guys have a favorite character or scene or any bit that you think is really cool? And then for Jim, do you know how he edited? Like, was he editing on the fly, or did he write and then go back, or?
Like Michael said, he was writing so fast that the first draft was the one that was submitted, and he worked with an editor at Del Rey, but they came out pretty fully formed. I remember just being sort of the person he would sometimes call and say, "Do you think that this might work, or do you think that this sounds okay?" And I mean, he just had it. He just was able to just write those books. Almost fully formed. I think the story was in his mind and he just got it down on paper.
That is an amazing ability.
Oh yeah, it was remarkable. Yeah, he was really widely read, as you say, and he was always I've never met anybody who just was constantly cutting things out of, at the time, newspapers and magazines. And he had an enormous file cabinet just filled with files for technology or for things that he thought he might be able to use in his novels. So he's always drawing on that. and a real mentor to writers who were trying to break in. Anytime he met anybody, the next day he was sending him some article or sending him something. So very mentoring personality in addition to everything else.
Can we play a little bit of his voice?
Oh yeah, let's go for it.
Okay.
That's cool thing.
So you can find us on Ryan Daley's official website, and it's a recording from the Mark Steiner show on, it was on NPR in the 90s, and he's talking about AI and what's going to happen, and science fiction in AI. I think it's very relevant for today, so if I can get it to work.
All because they're utterly depressing, even though predictably they may be, according to what we think in 1995, more likely to be accurate. But then, of course, nobody else where robots evolve into self-programming and self-improving machines, and at least in the most benign scenario, they kind of take human beings on as pets. And you can find that in science fiction, but as John said, it doesn't satisfy what a lot of readers are looking for in terms of a human tale. Yeah. So science fiction goes in so many different directions. I would call to question a little bit your remark about the predictive power of science fiction. What really happens is so many people make so many stabs and so many things that some of it sticks to the wall. Yeah, some of it. Shotgun effect. Exactly. So you can find those Moraveckian tales if you look hard enough in science fiction.
Can I mention two places where science fiction may be more successful? They can't be done. They are. One is time travel.
Yeah, you can listen to a little bit of his voice to kind of bring into
It
this.
does sound like Han Solo. That was the first thing I thought. I was like, that's Han Solo.
I know he's I was able when I was able to interview Jim and his Brian Daley's widow Lucia, and I was able to go to his office, and Lucia kept his office kind of the way it was, and I saw his file cabinets with all these manila folders with all these different magazines from the 90s and the 80s that he had collected, and the typewriter was still there, and he had on his desk I think a triangle that said he was trying to write the Return of the Jedi radio dramas before he passed away, and it was a different type of project because they didn't have quite the budget that they had for the original. So you could either do time, I think it's like speed, quality, or quantity. You can only pick two, and that's really the way it is.
Right. Well, going back, I realized I threw two questions out. What about favorite parts of the Han Solo books?
There's well, I sometimes focus on little things, but it's little things that I find incredible. I think in Star Wars Revenge, he introduces Plo Koon. And if you read just those 4 paragraphs when that character is introduced, I mean, it's a lot of information, very succinctly, puts you right in the moment, who this lone shark is, who his henchmen are, what he's all about, how despicable he is. But that name sticks out. For whatever reason, I could just never forget that name. Who comes up with Plo Koon for one? But it's an awesome name, and it's a great Star Wars name.
I mean,
and
that just describes it right there.
It just stuck with me. I was like, who thinks of that? But it's fantastic. When he introduces Galandra, and you've got this menacing gunslinger, the way he describes him, the way he's got that mustachio beaded, deal with the short hair, and then he really conveys just how much of a terror this guy is, how he's just a killer. Those cool blue eyes, and this is, I think, through the point of view of Han Solo seeing this person. He's assessing him right off the bat, and is getting that read on how he looks, and just how those eyes are described. That this isn't someone you mess with, and it really puts you in that moment that this is going to be an issue. Dealing with this gunslinger is going to be an issue, and it's just amazing because it's not a whole lot of word count there, but you see it, you feel it, and this is before. I think this is before Boba Fett, but I'm reading this, I'm like, oh damn, this is Boba Fett. It's like before Boba Fett was even introduced to anybody, and it's just but it's moments like that. It's like, this is just amazing work. And if you go through those books and everything else, you see how many things that Brian was able to tap into that you're going to see this later on, whether it's in the films or anything else. He really had his finger on the pulse of what Star Wars is.
He was a fan of westerns, and he was a tall guy, and he could mimic the John Wayne walk. He used to always do that. And I really recommend, if you ever want to search for some things that he did, he wrote scripts for a TV series called Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers, and it was a western in outer space, and the stories he contributed to that are terrific, and they're in the vein of what you were talking about, his ability to just create a terrific character very quickly.
Yeah, no, I think you said it really well. Pluvo, 2 for 1, you know, Belandro, those are great. So Zim, I mean, within you know, a 170-page novel, he creates a whole backstory for Star Wars, you know, that is beyond the Jedi. And I used a lot of that, and I did a kind of riff on that when I did something called The Despotica for Lucasfilm, where I kind of developed that era of Star Wars, and it was so much fun to do, and I owe all that to Brian, you know, and what he started in Han Solo: Lost Legacy, and the war box of Zim, and all that stuff.
I remember when he was working on that, because he found an article about those ceramic soldiers that were found in China. Yeah, and that was his jumping off point for the robot soldiers. So he just said, you know, I found something, and it was a little bit of Flash Gordon and a little bit of real life.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, because that was a new discovery at the time. So it was just like
Right.
Yeah,
Just
somebody
buried
buried
and incorporate
their
that.
giant army.
He was always looking for things like that. Yeah.
Let's dive back over to the radio dramas, and you know, for those who haven't listened to them, it's not just like the movie itself, that it is hugely expanded. That you know, NPR, you know, how long are they? Like 12 hours each or something?
No, 6.5.
6.5.
And then 5 hours for Empire, and 3 for Return of the Jedi.
But I think somebody made the comment that, you know, it was like 20 times the amount of dialogue that was in
Absolutely.
the film, you know. He just had to expand on all those different aspects of the film.
Yeah, he came out here to LA, and he had to write an episode every couple of days. He had to pound away. You know, he was in a hotel here in Los Angeles because they needed it done. From what I learned, is that there was a first writer. They got a British writer on Star Wars that they had hired, and he wrote a version of his own version of Star Wars. It was like the Lord of the Rings, and I don't know where that script is. It sounds like a fantastic script, but they said, nah, this isn't what we're looking for. We kind of want something more in tune with the movies. So then they said they were desperate for a writer. And Brian had been doing the Han Solo books, and they had a good relationship with him. They went to him, and that's how he got, from what I heard, that's how he got the job.
Yeah, one of the cool things about those NPR dramas is that they introduced like so many new characters that are just like little throwaway line ones of like, oh, we have, you know, Captain Colton and such, and then those have come back around and woven their way back into the larger Star Wars storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not easy writing for audio either, because you have to describe through dialogue without being expository too much. You have to be a little bit, but Brian does it so well. It's so natural in a lot of his dialogue, especially Empire. I think Empire is where he's hidden his peak. You know, I think that's the best of the bunch. But yeah.
The actors were having a great time too. It's just a throwback to like the early days of radio, like The Shadow and all those other series, and just really being able to bring these characters to life through audio. It's terrific.
Yeah, there's a great episode just between Han and Luke in Empire Strikes Back, and it's their conversation in that little tent in the winter on Hoth while the blizzard is hitting. You know, and it's just the two of them, and that's what radio does so well. It takes the epic and makes it intimate. You know, it does that. You can't do that in a movie.
I'm now wondering, what do they talk about? I mean, Luke is
They
kind
talk about
of
Leia a little bit.
Right. What else would they talk about?
You got to keep Luke alive somehow. It's like, wow. Now I'm thinking.
Maybe it's Brian and Jim on one of your trips in a tent, right?
Yeah, it could be. won't say who we were talking about.
So where did you go on some of these trips?
We went all over the place. We went to Nepal and Peru, Guatemala, Mexico. I just sort of dragged him along. But he felt like he needed to get away from the typewriter. And so we'd be in the middle of some horrible situation and he'd be cursing me out for dragging him so long. But I think he enjoyed it. Probably found his way into his fiction.
Yeah, I think I read something in what you wrote, or where there was a videotape of Return of the Jedi in some jungle camp. Something.
No, that was we were trekking. We came back from a trek in Nepal. We've been out for like 30 days, and Brian wanted to reward the Sherpas who had helped us, carry our gear and get stuck in the rain and everything else. And there was a video store in Kathmandu, and they had a bootleg of Return of the Jedi, that had been shot in a film, and it was all grainy and horribly shot, but he rented it, brought it back to our hotel, invited all the Sherpas there, and everybody sat around and just had a wild time watching the movie.
Again, picturing that must have been just a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun, yes. Brian got severely loaded. He was actually, part of it was he was celebrating the fact that he had gotten a telegram that Return of the Jedi was a go. And so he said, finally I'm going to be able to do that. But then when we got back to the States, that project collapsed. And it wasn't until shortly before he died that he was able to complete that trilogy.
Well, you said telegram?
A telegram.
That's awesome.
Telegram, yes, telegram. It's 1983.
It's funny the way you're describing the situations. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
I have.
It's like you're Del Griffith and he's Neil. And you're just dragging him through.
That works. That works. Yeah.
And one of his other Star Wars projects that probably doesn't get a whole lot of mention is his original audio drama, the Rebel Mission to Ornamental. You guys have any thoughts and recollections of those?
It's if you get a chance to, if you don't have a record player with the original record or a cassette, you can probably find it on YouTube. It's not very long. It's or just out there in social media. It's not very long. It's about 20 to 30 minutes maybe in its playtime. But and I know that I realize there's voice actors that are girls. Listen to the dialogue because he captures Han Solo perfectly. He captures Luke Skywalker perfectly. But when you think about, he's telling the story within 20 plus minutes. It's adventure after adventure after adventure, back to back to back, and it's just you're just flying by the seat of your pants from the get-go. Everything makes sense. Everything is got this incredible feel to it, and if you're looking for just a 20 to 30 minute bite of Star Wars, then it gives you that story for the day. Listen to it because it's truly amazing what he's able to do with those voices and that setting, and just how quickly he can connect all these adventures together that really give a good feel of Star Wars. But no, it's a really great story. I'm truly impressed that he could do that quickly.
Yeah, and that is the original source for the Bounty Hunter and Ornamental line in Empire Strikes Back. He was asked to go fill that in, and so it was like his first part of. I should say it's the first part of EU, that he's already written EU stuff. But yeah, but one that's specifically tied to a particular moment in the films.
One of the downsides of being friends with him was he came back from Lucasfilm when they were filming Empire Strikes Back, and he said, "Jim, I've got to tell you something. I got to tell you something about the movie." I said, "Brian, wait, I don't want to hear anything about the movie. I've got to tell you something about the movie. I've got to tell you something." I was practically putting my hands over my ears, and he said, "Darth Vader is Luke's father." I was like Luke at the end, just going, "No." So I didn't have that. I was spoiled for that film. That's great. Wow. This is, by the way, this was Brian's shirt when that film had a different title. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this now, and Brian was one of the writers, and I think you were too, and the contention for continuing the expanded universe during the time of publication. You know, and one of the things that I would have always liked to see, and I believe I saw when I worked at Lucasfilm during the Phantom Menace, I believe I saw a treatment or a document that was one of the pitch materials that was sent in, because Del Rey and Bantam, they were two different publishing entities at that time, and there was a bidding war, I think, for the Star Wars rights. You know, and I think Brian and maybe you too, you were on the other end, right?
Yeah, that's when the license was sort of up for grabs, and Del Rey made a last pitch to Lucasfilm and asked Brian to just outline where he thought the series should go after the third film. And it was, it's interesting because it's like an alternate reality. Like, I really like Tim Zahn's approach, but Brian's was not the military science fiction that we got from Tim and the Bantam line, but something more Arthurian, much more mythical. I'm always imagining where Brian might have taken the line.
Yeah, it was something like we were trying to assemble his knights.
Yeah, assemble his knights.
Like the art, like the knights in the round table.
Right.
Well, Jim, you did work with him on a lot of things, so you did have a really good insight to how his brain worked. Can you tell us about working on Robotech with him?
Yeah, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Robotech. It was sort of American anime. You know, it's a crazy idea. It was sort of like, you know, I think Woody Allen, one of his first films, he took this Japanese film and he rewrote all the dialogue to have it be like the search for some chicken noodle soup recipe or something. It was just a crazy film. And with Robotech, what's his name, Carl Masick, took 3 unrelated Japanese anime and felt that the animation styles allowed them to be wedded together into one story, and it just wrote all new dialogue. And it caught on in the early 80s, and Brian and I adapted it. It was a 22-book series in the end, and talk about fast writing, so we had to deliver a book a month. You know, just one, you know, and Brian was, you know, was up to the task. I mean, never late on any manuscript.
So how did that collaboration work?
We divide. Brian would be writing on one book, and I'd be writing the sequel. And then when he finished his manuscript, I'd read his manuscript. He'd read mine. We were trying to find a joint voice under a pseudonym, Jack McKinney, and it worked out well. And we never. It was Jack McKinney. It was a long time before anybody realized that Brian Daley had a hand in that.
And wow, cranking out one a month.
One a month, yeah. But I mean, you know, really, we used to wear out VCRs because we had the VCR tapes of the animation. So we just, you know, be watching it, you know, try and describe what was going on screen, you know, and that amount of pausing on the videotape, I don't know, none of you probably remember this, but if you paused for too long, the tape was shot. So we just went through tape after tape after tape trying to get that down.
Sorry, my eyes are.
Do you miss those days of writing that fast?
No. Although I'll tell you, some of the Star Wars books that I wrote had pretty quick turnaround. And it's a little frustrating as a writer because you just have to let go of the manuscript sooner than you might want to. You know, you just have to be satisfied with sometimes, as you say, like a first draft, and just get it out there and hope that you've done enough. But you know, that's part of franchise work.
Yeah, it's crazy, and the perfectionist me hates that. You know, the fact that I have to turn in a manuscript before even getting to spell check it. You know, at times, which is crazy to think about, but that's the business. You have to be. I guess you have to be good enough to be able to get to that point to do that. So Brian was definitely able to do that.
do you guys have any thoughts on his like lasting legacy in Star Wars or in general as a writer and as a friend?
I think he's regarded as one of the chief contributors, don't you think? In the franchise, I mean, I think his books are really well respected, well regarded. I mean, he helped create the vocabulary for Star Wars. I mean, like the Z-95 Headhunter became like the forerunner of the X-Wing, and he was the first one to introduce swoops, the swoop bikes. I think he was also the first one to put the Falcon up on end, going through a canyon, and losing part of itself, even before that made it into the movie. So he was really plugged in, you know.
One of my college projects, I had to do a script, and I did an audio script of, I adapted Han Solo at Star's End. So I remember that moment at the beginning when they're going through and he loses his sensor dish.
Right.
That's what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then, I mean, even, was it Ann Crispin who wrote
A.C. Crispin,
yeah, A.C. Crispin, who wrote the a Han Solo trilogy, and she paid homage to Brian. And I think even in the Solo film, there were some callbacks to Brian's work. So, you know, he's sort of one of the founding fathers.
Yeah, one of the things in Dryden Voss's ship is like specifically the skull that you see on the cover of like the Lost Legacy novel. Yeah, so it's his DNA is still there and coming back out. I don't know. You guys have any extra thoughts?
Well, when I talked to L. Mill Smith, and he said when he was writing the Lando books, he had long conversations with Brian on, first of all, you know, how to make this connect with his series, and how do you get this done. I think L. Mill Smith had even less time than Brian Daley for his books. He had like 20 days, 15 days. So, you know, how do you do this? And I think Brian helped him through that.
He did. That was Brian, the mentor. I remember those conversations he was having with Daniel Smith, who was not a fast writer, and really had to up his game to get those books out.
I always saw that what he did was his foundation to the what would become the Star Wars expanded universe, and as everyone's pointed out, what we see in the films. But there's little things that you see throughout his work that you kind of see repeat in one way or another. There's in one of his books, it's Bullocks, the labor droid who's now in like later match with them. It's word choice. So something like Combat Atomica, something really clever for this menacing droid he has to fight. But it's a gladiator fight. It's a real fight. And when you go through lots of different Star Wars material, if you go through a lot of Western games material, you'll see gladiator arenas. You know, you've got Attack of the Clones with Geonosis. You've got all these different things that you can see throughout the whole spectrum of Star Wars storytelling. And if you go back to Brian's original work, you often find here was that idea, you know, and now we see it, you know, across poly, all these other different types of mediums.
The name Bollocks, right?
Bollocks.
Yeah, in the British edition, it's not
Bollocks.
Bollocks. Because it's not
Yeah, that's funny. But no, I always remember Bollocks because he had the Blue Max droid inside his chest, and so that was just such a novel idea to have like this droid within a droid, and they have completely separate functions and personalities, and you know they get split apart at different times. That Han takes Blue Max live in one place, and Bollocks has to go fight in the gladiator arena. We'll open up to any other questions, comments. Greg? Yeah.
This is sort of a but
Also, actually, can you stand up and
oh, sure.
we got a microphone for you. We want to record this, so you're here for posterity.
This is kind of a comment, but also a question if you've heard of it. I only found about this like a few months ago, but apparently in Hungary, in the 90s, they started translating all the EU books into Hungarian, and the Brian Daley books proved so popular that they ghost wrote 4 Hungarian Han Solo adventure sequels, and because of legal loopholes, they all got published. and people have only very recently started translating them into English. I don't know if you've heard that or not.
I haven't heard that, but Brian, you hear that?
He had his own bootlegs, right?
That's pretty awesome to have, bootleg of your own writing, and it's like, yes.
Oh, I have a question in relation to,
Robotech. So, I didn't get to finish the series, but I was watching the old English dubs just for the heck of it. It was available for free on Amazon Prime. So there's this scene, I can't remember the exact episode. I'm wondering how you and Brian handled it back in the day. So there's this ace pilot, he's not the main one, he's like the best friend. And he meets one of the alien girls, and they fight in a little match, and then they meet at the park later, and she almost tries to kill him. And she's suddenly like, because she missed, she's like freaking out. It's like, oh, you should just kill me, I'm useless. And out of the blue, he's like, this is gonna sound really weird, but do you wanna get married? And they get married! I'm wondering how you guys handle
There were a
that.
lot of moments like that in Robotech, and we were just describing what went on. We were like, you had to. Those were novels, so we had to dig deep and try and make sense of that sort of thing. Robotech had giant aliens,
yeah.
50-foot tall aliens, and it was a lot of fun, really, to try and make that work on the page.
All right, we got one more question, and then we're gonna start wrapping up. The blue shirt, or the Raider shirt.
This is a question for Mr. Luceno. Could you share a bit of wisdom or technique or advice that Brian really taught you?
I wouldn't even know where to begin. I mean, if it wasn't, I wouldn't be here, honestly, as a Star Wars writer if it wasn't for Brian, because early in my career, I was writing adventure novels, which was not a particularly well-selling genre, and it was Brian who convinced me to try my hand at script writing for Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers, which was, science fiction, Western in space. And that worked out for me, and out of that project, we got Robotech, and I was really on shaky ground there. I had, I'd never written science fiction before, never written space opera, so I would study Brian's manuscripts and, his word choice, his vocabulary, I can't begin to tell you how much I learned from him, and so when I finally got a chance to write for Star Wars, the first book I wrote was Hero's Trial, and it had to do with Han after the death of Chewbacca, and I brought a lot of Brian's characters back into that book, just in homage to him.
Yeah, so we've got some, are you guys, we're wrapping up, and are you guys doing any more panels or signings today that you want to mention?
I'm going to be on the new JR panel later today. I think it might be around 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. I'll be on that panel with James and Matt Stover, and it's part of what I did behind the scenes. I'll say what I can say. I still haven't come to each other here in play, but I hope to bring something positive to that panel.
Yeah, I'll be signing books at a booth out there, and yeah, I should say that Jim finished Brian's great manuscript, Gamelon, and even though it goes under Brian's name, he basically wrote the last 3 books. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, very sad time. Brian was dying of pancreatic cancer. He'd been working on this massive opus called Gamelon for almost 10 years, and shortly before the end, he asked me, from his bed, he just said, finish this for me. And so when he died, I found all of his notes, I found everything he had written, and it became a 4-book series. So that was my way of closure with Brian.
And you have a signing today?
I've got a signing now, right after this, and I'm doing the NJO panel, and I'm also sitting in with Matt Stover and Sean Stewart on a panel devoted to the Clone Wars.
and you can check those out in the schedule. I also want to highlight that the book truck, there's this, silent auction going on. It's all new stuff not from yesterday, so it's brand new. And one of the really cool things in there is a new Jedi Order hat that James and Matthew Stover have signed. So that's a really cool thing, as well as lots of other stuff. So go check that out. We're raising money to get books in the hands of kids. So that's something we can all get behind. Thank you so much for coming out to this tribute to Brian Daley. Hope you enjoyed it and have a great Legacy Expo.